Do you know when you do something and you've been doing something for a very long time, you do something and you've become so good at it. You've become so good at it, you could do it with your eyes closed. In fact, you're doing it with your eyes closed because you know everything about it. And then one day, either someone steps into whatever it is you're doing and shows you a different way, or you suddenly manage to look at it from a place you've never looked at it before and see more. See that there may be another way of doing what you've been doing for so long, but because you've always done it the way we've always been done and you always did it, you no longer knew that it could be another way, and suddenly, oh my God, something is opening up for you, and suddenly there's more. It becomes multidimensional, and your experience is richer, better for it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know those moments? I love those moments. Those are my favorite moments. Those are my favorite moments in life, when you've done something for so long and suddenly it's completely different. It's the same, but it's completely different. And you just risen to another level. And I have to admit, I'm deeply blessed to do the work that I do, because part of the work that I do, I get to experience this kind of moments very often. I'll tell you why, because it is built in the practice of Judaism. It is built in. It is what our sages have told us to do for thousands of years. In fact, it almost could come from a quote that I found in Pirkei Avot. Famous quote by a very famous rabbi in Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot is one of the tractates that made it into the Talmud some 2,000 years ago. Pirkei Avot is usually mistranslated in English as the ethics of our fathers. It's the book that is known under that name, but the Hebrew doesn't mean that at all. The Hebrew actually means first principles. And some of the Talmudic scholars believe that this might have been actually Pirkei Avot, the first principles, might have been the first book of the entire sea of the Talmud that was written over 600 years. That those were really the first principles. That the early rabbis got together and said, okay, what are the very few things that we want to enshrine in our tradition that would be the first principles? And this great rabbi was really well known because he's got an amazing name. He's got an amazing mind, but he also has an amazing name. His name is Rabbi Ben Bagbag. Have you ever heard of Rabbi Ben Bagbag? It's actually his real name, Rabbi Ben Bagbag. And he said, and I quote, he's talking about the Torah. He says, turn it and turn it again, for all is in it. See through it. Grow old and worn in it. Do not budge from it, for there is nothing that works better than it. I'm going to say it again. It's such powerful. It made it to the first principles. Turn it and turn it again, for all is in it. See through it. Grow old and worn in it. Do not budge from it, for there is nothing that works better than it. This is so important in Judaism. This is so critical of Judaism. Always look for more. Whatever you think you know, turn it and turn it and turn it and look for more. Find a different angle. Look for a different perspective. If you think you have the answer, you are wrong. You need to find more questions. If you find any answer arises, and we've been learning that answer and repeating that answer because whatever great rabbi some 100 years ago said this was the answer, question that. Question everything you ever think you know for sure in your life. Turn it and turn it again. Not just the Torah. Torah is an image. Torah means teaching. Torah is a metaphor for life. We are Torah. Each and every one of us writing our own life Torah every moment. Never remain stuck. Never think that you've read everything, that you know everything. Turn it and turn it again. That's why we're not a religion that has a dogma. We just don't have a catechism. We don't have a dogma. Because of Rabbi Ben Bakbak. Because of sentences like that. Oh, for sure, over generations, we've always had our disputes. There's always been a group of those who wanted to kind of cement the tradition, to wanted to give us real guidelines, to unify Judaism, to do that. And there's always been a voice that have completely reacted to that. One of the latest 300 years ago was the Hasidic tradition, who went completely against the grain of the Talmudists who really wanted to ossify and classify and make Judaism a dogma. And that Hasidic tradition just blew it all apart. And now they are the ones 300 years later who are trying to ossify and calcify and dogmatize the tradition. But it's not going to work because it's never worked before. It comes from the revelation at Sinai. We had this revelation at Sinai some thousands of years ago, if you believe it ever happened, which I don't. But if we do, that was a lot to say in one breath. I could be excommunicated for just that one sentence. And that would be a badge of honor. But revelation didn't happen at Sinai, and it was done and over. We said at Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will continue to listen. We will continue to hear it. We will continue to learn. And we will continue to evolve it and do it. Generation after generation, person after person, community after community, rabbi after rabbi, student after student. We are the being through which revelation is still unfolding. God needs us as much as we need God. To unfold God's self into the world, to reveal God's self into the world. We are the beings, the hands, the mouth, the ears, the nose, the feet through which that happens. If we are still waiting for that booming voice that is going to come through the clouds, we're going to be waiting for a long time. And we're going to miss that we are actually the ones manifesting the divine, evolving the divine in the world. So I love when I find something new in something old. And that's what happened for me this Passover. That's why I'm talking about it, because it's Passover. And this Passover, I've had an amazing experience of something that got revealed to me, a sentence that I've read so many times. In fact, it's a sentence that I probably personally wrote into the Bet Aleph Haggadah some years ago when I wrote it. And then, after year, you read the same sentences, and it becomes just another sentence in the Haggadah. It's the sentence that comes towards, just a few minutes before we are about to eat. I mention that because it's always the moment people remember. It's the moment where we start to do all the little rituals around the Seder plate. And one of the rituals is the eating of the matzah. And in the Passover Haggadah, the Bet Aleph Passover Haggadah, in that moment, just a few lines before we said the blessing, there is a quote from Reb Nachman of Bratslav. Talk about an early Hasidic master, 1700s Poland, incredible mystic, dear Kabbalist, profound influence on the Jewish meditative path, on Jewish meditation practices. And he was teaching about the matzah, that during the Seder, we call the matzah different things. One of the things we call it first at the beginning of the Seder, we call it halachma aniyah. Halachma aniyah, the bread of affliction, the bread of slavery. But then later on, as we tell the story of our leaving Egypt, we tell the story of our freeing ourselves in hastes from our places of enslavement so fast that the bread that we took with us, that we, was par-baked, I didn't have the time to leaven, and so the matzah was being baked as we were running away under the sun of the desert. And so it is also the bread of our liberation. And Reb Nachman of Breslov was teaching that the matzah is called both the bread of our enslavement and the bread of our liberation. The matzah was the same. The bread was the same. But it was its taste that changed. What enslaves us? What is that gets us stuck? I want to venture to say that what keeps us enslaved, what keeps us stuck, is our need for control, is our fear of change, is our inability to be present with what is. And that fear of change is what gets us into those stuck places. What prevents us from evolving. What prevents us from growing. And that fear of change is, as far as I'm concerned, fear of life. Because what defines life is change. Life is change. Life is an ongoing movement. Life is moment to moment, evolving and changing and moving and expanding and contracting and being born and being reborn and dying and starting all over again. Life, by definition, is change. And our resisting change, our resisting what is what keeps us stuck. So no, life is not a box of chocolates. Life is a box of matzah. And if you are going to resist life, if you are going to be so afraid of yourself changing, of the world changing, of your nation changing, of your job changing, of everything that is always going to be changing. You know, people sometimes come to me because they are very upset with their spouse and they're about to divorce them and they want some advice, and he or she would say, well, let's say he would say, well, she's no longer the woman that I married. And I said, well, thank God. I mean, look how old you are. You still wanted her to be 18? I mean, thank God she's grown. Thank God she's evolved. Thank God she's matured. Thank God she lives now on a different plane. And you're lucky to have her. Right, but we get into, this is an example, we get into those places. We don't want to change. We want people to remain the way we first loved them. We want our life to stay the way we really enjoyed it. We want everything to remain the same, let's be honest. And when we do that, when we resist life itself, we make ourselves miserable. Not just ourselves, but the people around us. And that's when we eat from the matzah of life. And when we taste the matzah of life from that place of resisting life, it tastes bitter. It tastes like lachma anya, like bread of affliction, bread of slavery. But when we are able to let life flow through us, to align ourselves with its energy, to align ourselves with its guidance, to no longer resist it, no longer try to control it, but to flow with it, to say amen to whatever it brings to us. To know that we learn from all the positive and we learn from all the negative. And all of it makes us better people, stronger people, more evolved beings. And to surrender into that, to surrender into the flow, the shefa in our tradition, the shefa of life, the flow of life. When we are able to do that, to be at home with change, to be at home even with chaos. When we are able to do that, and when we grab a matzah the matzah of our life, then it will taste like freedom. It will taste like freedom. I loved when things that were already there suddenly become here. It was such a magical moment that unfolded after it took 3 Seders, you know. We should have more. Who knows what could happen? But that was not the whole of it. Because from that insight came a different insight. And that was also very powerful. You know, it's turn it and turn it again, right? You've been gifted something that you get to look at, and now you go, oh, let's turn that again and again. Let's do what Ben Badbag told us to do. I often share that teaching, and I'm going to, on one foot, do it very quickly tonight because that will lead me to that second insight that came through me. I often share the teaching that when we arrived in Egypt, when we arrived in the land that was eventually going to become our place of enslavement, to us, as we first got there, it was a promised land. We fled from Canaan because there was famine in the land. We were going to die. Jacob and his tribe descended into Egypt in haste because it was a matter of life and death. And we were received there by Joseph, one of Jacob's son, who was second in command to Pharaoh at the time. That's another long story. And Joseph gave us the most fertile land in Egypt. When we arrived in Egypt, we arrived at the promised land. In fact, if you read the Hebrew of what the text is saying of our benefactor and what we received, it echoes the blessing that God gave Abraham at the beginning of the book of Genesis, of what to expect when he will finally arrive in the promised land. These words, almost verbatim, is what describes Egypt. Some of the rabbis said, oh, we made the wrong turn, but now here we are. It wasn't Canaan, it was Egypt. Maybe God, had a lisp or something, who knows? He meant to say Egypt, it was. But when things are good in our life, as the teaching goes, we lose consciousness. Who has time for inner dwelling? Who has time for spirituality when things are so much fun on the outside? Right? When in the objective world we are having a blast, we don't have time to go within and wrestle with things. We just party. Life is good. And as we grow unconscious, the place that we call the promised land becomes the next place of our enslavement. We lose consciousness, we lose our grounding, we lose our identity, we lose ourselves. Life as a sense of changing as it is. Pharaoh tells us, the beginning of the book of Exodus, there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt who knew not Joseph. Life changes. And suddenly we went from, ooh, life is great, to, oh, there's a new king in the land. Sounds familiar. Well, what did we do? We resisted that. We resisted. We collapsed. We pushed back. We said, we wanted things to remain the way they were. We wanted things to remain the way they were. And that became the path, the downward spiral path of our own enslavement. And then the story continues, right? We reach rock bottom, as the story and reality often is. And that rock bottom is the beginning of our freeing ourselves from whatever kept us stuck, whatever we were addicted to, whatever we were resisting. And then we get out of that stuck place eventually, and we know because we've gone through this cycle many times in our life, right? And we move through this in-between place, that wilderness. Hopefully we won't dwell there for 40 years. Sometimes we do for a few months, and then we look for the next promised land. Is it on the left? Is it on the right? We try to carve a path to find the next place in our life that will feel right, that will feel good, that will feel like we are again in that space, that new promised land. And hopefully it's not a circle, that we don't go around in circle in our life. Hopefully it's a spiral, so that every time we met a new promised land, we've grown a little. We are on a higher level of awareness or consciousness. We're not going to repeat the mistakes we made in the old place, in the old promised land. This is the new promised land. But we also know that even this one is going to turn into a place of enslavement again. And the cycle will go on and on. As long as we are in this body, the cycle will go on. Now notice what I said, that when we are traversing that in-between space, like that space in between the promised land, we know in our hearts that we are already looking for the next promised land. We're in the wilderness, but we are already trying to carve a path towards finding that next promised land. We look at the different landmark. We are actively participating in our traversing the desert, right? We have our goal. Our goal is to find a promised land. And we do everything we can to get us there. What I call that is more trying to control. What I call that is more trying to manipulate reality, more trying to shape life the way the ego wants. And so, yeah, we might get to that place that is a very nice, comfortable place that we might call the promised land. At least the ego will get there. The ego will feel good. The ego will feel content. The ego will feel this new job, this new relationship, my new car, my new home, this new city, all of that, great. That's exactly what I wanted. But the problem is that I brought from the wilderness with me the seeds that are going to unravel that promised land. I bring it with me because my journey there carried the baggage of resisting, of manipulating, of controlling. That hasn't changed within me. So even though on the outside there's a beautiful veneer and here is Jerusalem, I've already sown in that the seeds that are going to cause the unraveling of that promised land. Now, what does that mean? Where does that leave us? First of all, we could continue and move through the cycle, as we have probably been doing all our life, and we'll move a little higher every time, and that's fine, and we can enjoy the ride and continue to work on that. There's nothing wrong with that. Or we can decide to become truly free. To become truly free is actually to let go of our need and our attachment to find the next promised land. Because it's only the ego who needs the next promised land. To be truly free is to be, like I said, which was the teaching that came through this teaching, to be truly free is to be at home in the chaos. To be truly free is to be at home in the wilderness. There is no promised land other than being at home in the wilderness. Being at home in the chaos. Being at home in the unknown. This is where true freedom actually arises. As long as we are going to want to find the next promised land, we're going to create more attachment, more wanting, more controlling, more grabbing onto. When we are able to completely release all attachment to finding any kind of promised land and be at home in the wilderness, then we will truly be free. Might not be very comfortable at first, but this will be a true place of freedom. And in that place of not knowing, where there are, the wilderness, there are no certainties. There are no landmarks to hold on to. But there's the vastness of the heart, the vastness of spirit. You know, in Hebrew, the word wilderness is midbar. It's the same root that the word medaber. And medaber means that which speaks. We can only hear that which speaks, whatever we understand that to be, when we find ourselves in the wilderness. When we are busy in the promised land, we can't really listen. And in that place, as the song we are about to sing says, we embrace the bitter and the sweet. We taste the honey and suffer from the sting of the bee, because all of it, we know, is the expression of the one. And in that place, the matzah itself becomes transformed. It becomes transformed and it becomes manna. Manna. You know what manna means in Hebrew? What is it? That's what it means. What is it? Because Ben Bagbag told us, you have to turn it and turn it and turn it again and continue always asking questions. What is this? And what is this? And what is this?